It started with an ordinary evening that didn't feel ordinary at all. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that waits for someone to break it. I was there to drop off something for her son, my best friend, but he wasn't home yet. Only she was. She stood by the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied in a loose knot that didn't quite hold. The smell of coffee and vanilla hung in the air, soft and warm, wrapping around us like a memory I hadn't lived yet. We talked like we always did, small things, harmless things. But lately, even harmless felt dangerous. There was something about the way her eyes lingered when she smiled, how her laughter slowed near the end, as if she was afraid of what might come after the silence. I noticed her more than I should have. The way a lock of black hair slipped from behind her ear, the way her voice softened when she said my name. And maybe she noticed too, because when our hands brushed as she handed me a mug, she didn't pull away right away. She froze, just for a second, long enough for the air between us to shift from casual to charged. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said quietly. I smiled, unsure how to pretend I didn't know what she meant. "Like what?" Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back, resting against the counter as if she needed space to breathe. I could see her pulse at her neck, fast, visible, betraying her calm voice. "You're young," she said finally. "You'll forget this phase." I wanted to laugh, but my voice came out lower. "What if I don't?" She looked away, biting her lip, the smallest tremor running through her hand as she reached for her cup. The sunlight through the window caught the curve of her cheek, the soft line of her collarbone, the faint hint of pink rising under her skin. "This can't happen," she said, almost to herself. "It's wrong." Maybe it was. But the way she said it sounded like she was trying to convince herself, not me. I took a step closer, close enough to see the reflection of my own hesitation in her eyes, close enough to smell the faint sweetness of her perfume. I didn't say it would. I whispered. She exhaled, long and slow, and for a moment, I thought she'd tell me to leave. But instead, she gave me that small, uncertain smile I'd seen too many times lately. The kind that said she knew she was standing too close and didn't plan to move. And that's when she set the rule, her voice barely a whisper, but steady. "One kiss," she said. Nothing more. But even then, I could tell from the look in her eyes, she already knew rules don't survive the moment they're tested. The words hung between us like something fragile, too delicate to touch, too dangerous to ignore. One kiss, nothing more. She said it like she was building a wall, but everything in her eyes looked like a door left slightly open. I could have walked away right then. Should have. But neither of us moved. The world outside the kitchen didn't seem to exist anymore. Just her, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the sound of both our hearts trying too hard to stay steady. Her hand trembled slightly when she reached up, maybe to brush her hair back, maybe to stop me from stepping closer. I'll never know, because before she could finish the motion, I caught her wrist gently. Her pulse raced beneath my fingers, and, for a second, I thought she might pull away. She didn't. "You don't have to," I murmured. Her eyes met mine, dark brown, filled with everything she wasn't saying. "I know," she whispered back. And that's when it happened. The kiss that was supposed to mean nothing. It wasn't rushed, not stolen, not hungry. It was careful, intentional. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask for more, but somehow gives everything. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of coffee and hesitation. She leaned into it, just enough to blur the space between restraint and surrender. For a moment, everything stilled. The ticking clock faded. The world stopped measuring time. When she finally drew back, her breath caught. She didn't open her eyes right away, just stayed there, close enough that I could still feel her warmth against my skin. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely there. "That's all," she said. But her hand stayed on my chest, her palm resting where my heartbeat was loudest. I don't know if she felt how uneven it was, or if she realized hers was the same. "That's all?" I asked softly, like I didn't believe her. She nodded, eyes still lowered, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her. A faint, guilty smile. That's what we agreed. Then she stepped back, brushing past me to pour another cup of coffee, pretending to be composed. But her shoulders were tense, and the spoon clinked too hard against the mug. She wouldn't look at me, though I could see the flush rising in her neck, the quiet storm building beneath her calm exterior. I didn't push. I didn't say another word, because something told me she needed the space to pretend it was over, even if we both knew it wasn't. When I finally turned to leave, she spoke again. "Don't make this harder," she said quietly. I looked back, one hand on the doorknob. "Then don't make it impossible." Her eyes met mine for the last time that night. A mix of fear, longing, and something dangerously close to regret. That one kiss changed everything. And from that moment on, nothing between us would ever feel innocent again. The next morning, everything looked normal, but nothing felt that way. The sun was out, the same street noises filtered through the window, yet every sound felt like an interruption to something sacred that shouldn't have ended. I passed her driveway, pretending not to look, pretending not to care. But when her car door opened and our eyes met across the quiet morning, that single second carried more tension than an entire conversation could hold. She didn't smile. She didn't frown either. She just stood there, composed, graceful, pretending nothing happened, even though her gaze lingered half a beat too long. Later that afternoon, I stopped by to return the charger I'd borrowed from her son. The perfect excuse to see her again. She opened the door, looking effortlessly composed in a soft gray blouse and jeans that made her seem like the very definition of calm maturity. Her hair was tied back, but a few strands framed her face, glowing in the warm afternoon light. "You didn't have to bring it today," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes, they faltered just slightly. "I know," I replied, "but I wanted to—" Silence stretched, long enough for the air between us to turn heavier. She stepped aside to let me in. The smell of fresh laundry filled the room, the kind of domestic warmth that made everything feel too close, too intimate. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms like she was bracing herself for something she didn't want to face. "I think we both got carried away," she said. The tone was calm, measured, but her thumb rubbed anxiously against her forearm, betraying the truth her words couldn't hide. "Maybe," I answered softly, "but does that mean it didn't mean anything?" Her breath hitched just once before she turned her head away, avoiding my eyes. "It's not about meaning. It's about control. And how's that going for you?" I asked before I could stop myself. That earned me a look, sharp, conflicted, beautiful. The kind of look that says you shouldn't, but please don't stop. She exhaled, long and unsteady, her shoulders softening. "You're too young to understand what people lose when they stop thinking before they feel." I took a step closer. "Then teach me." Her breath caught again. The distance between us shrank until I could see the faint tremor in her lower lip, the way her fingers tightened against the counter's edge. Every part of her screamed restraint, but her silence said more than words ever could. "Don't," she whispered finally, voice shaking. I stopped, but I didn't step back. Her eyes flicked up, searching mine for something neither of us could name. For a moment, I thought she'd say it, that she wanted me to, that she couldn't stop thinking about that kiss either. But instead, she turned away, composing herself with that calm grace she wore like armor. "Go," she said softly, "before I forget why this is wrong." And even as I walked out the door, I knew she didn't mean it, because when it closed behind me, I could hear her whisper, barely audible, like a secret meant only for the quiet. "Too late." Days passed, but they didn't really pass. They lingered. Every hour carried the ghost of that kiss, the tension of every glance we'd tried not to share. It was as if time itself was testing how long we could pretend the line between us still existed. When I saw her again, it was at her son's small birthday gathering. There were people everywhere, neighbors, laughter, kids running through the yard. Everything looked wholesome, ordinary, except for the quiet, unspoken current that pulled between us from across the lawn. She stood near the grill, laughing politely with another parent, but her eyes found mine for half a second too long. It wasn't intentional. At least she tried to make it look that way, but I saw the flicker of panic when she realized I'd noticed. She turned back quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her smile too perfect to be real. Later, when the sun began to set and people started to leave, I offered to help clean up. She tried to protest, but I stayed anyway. Maybe we both needed a reason not to walk away, just yet. We moved around each other like magnets, trying to pretend they weren't drawn together. She handed me plates. I reached for them, and our fingers brushed. Just a touch. Innocent, nothing more. But the look in her eyes said otherwise. Her composure cracked for a second, her breath catching as if the contact burned more than it should have. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I'm just helping. You know that's not what I meant." I set the plate down, watching her. The light from the kitchen window framed her face, soft, warm, unguarded. The faint lines around her eyes deepened when she frowned, but it only made her look more real, more human, more impossible to forget. "I can stay away if you really want me to," I said quietly. "Do you?" She froze. Her lips parted like she wanted to say yes, but the word wouldn't come. Instead, she looked down, her voice breaking the fragile silence. "You make it hard to do the right thing." "I don't think what we feel is wrong," I said, stepping closer. Her hand twitched like she might stop me, but she didn't move. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "Then let it be mine." The room went still. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing through the open window. She turned away, her hands gripping the counter as if she needed to hold on to something solid. "People will talk," she said softly. I took another step closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of her perfume. "Then let them imagine the rest." She closed her eyes, her breath trembling, half a sigh, half a surrender. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Maybe not," I said, voice low, "but I know what I feel." And when she finally looked at me again, there was no denial in her eyes, only longing and the quiet, terrifying truth that we'd already crossed the line we'd been pretending not to see. The days after that night felt heavier, not with guilt, but with the quiet awareness that nothing was ever going to be the same again. Every glance between us carried a memory. Every silence held a pulse that wouldn't calm down. We had crossed something sacred, and no matter how much we tried to step back, the mark of it followed us. She stopped texting first, then she stopped answering right away. Her messages grew shorter, more careful, like she was rebuilding the walls brick by brick. I could feel her pulling away even through the glow of the screen. And yet, when we crossed paths at the grocery store, at her house, when I dropped by for something her son forgot, her eyes always betrayed her. That softness, that hesitation, it was still there, no matter how hard she tried to bury it. One evening, I found her sitting on the porch alone. The sun was dipping behind the trees, turning everything gold. She looked lost in thought, fingers curled around a cup of coffee gone cold. I hesitated before walking up the steps, but she didn't look surprised to see me. "You shouldn't come here anymore," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the fading horizon. "I know," I replied, "but I couldn't stop thinking about you." She sighed, a soft, tired sound. "You're too young to get caught up in someone like me." I sat beside her, leaving just enough space between us to make the distance sake. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to make me stop caring." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "Because it should." A breeze moved through the yard, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was familiar now, comfortable but dangerous. She set her cup down, turning to face me. "Do you even understand what this is? What could cost?" I met her eyes. "I understand that it means something real. That's what scares me," she said softly. "Because I feel it too." The confession hung in the air like a spark that refused to fade. Her hand trembled when she reached for mine, her fingers brushing against my wrist before retreating. She didn't need to say more. I saw it, the war inside her, wanting me, but terrified of what it meant. "You deserve someone who can walk beside you in daylight," she murmured, "not someone who hides in shadows." "Then step into the light with me," I said. She shook her head, eyes glistening. "It's not that easy." Her son's laughter echoed faintly from inside the house, a cruel reminder of the world we were trying to ignore. She looked toward the sound, then back at me, her voice barely a whisper. "I wish I'd met you at a different time." I wanted to tell her that timing didn't matter, that what we had was worth every risk. But when she stood up, brushing away tears that never quite fell, I realized she wasn't ready to hear it. As she walked inside, the porch light flicked on, bathing the steps in pale yellow. I stayed there a while, staring at the empty chair beside me. The night air felt colder than before, and all I could think about was the warmth of her hand that had almost held mine, and how something that brief could weigh so much. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between us became its own kind of ache, not sharp, but deep and lingering. I still saw her sometimes, across the street, watering the plants, or driving past my building on her way to work. She'd wave, polite, careful, and yet her eyes would always flicker, just for a second, that same unspoken pull we never truly escaped. It wasn't longing anymore. It was something quieter, heavier, a tension neither of us knew how to resolve. We had made a promise to step back, to let what happened stay in the past. But emotions don't follow rules, and memories don't fade on command. One night, after weeks of pretending we were fine, she called. Her voice was soft, steady, the kind of calm people use when they're barely holding it together. "Can you come by?" she asked. I didn't even hesitate. When I arrived, she was sitting in the living room, barefoot, hair loose around her shoulders. The house was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of a floor lamp. There was no pretense in her face this time, just exhaustion and truth. "I didn't know who else to call," she said, staring down at her hands. "Everything feels too much." I sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth from her arm. "You can always call me." She smiled faintly. "That's the problem." For a while, we didn't talk. The room filled with the kind of silence that felt safe, the kind that made words unnecessary. She leaned back, eyes closed, letting out a long breath. I wanted to touch her hand, to remind her she wasn't alone. But I didn't. Not yet. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. "Every day." Her eyes opened then, meeting mine, steady, unguarded. "So do I." She turned slightly, her knee brushing mine, her breath close enough to warm the space between us. I could see the conflict flickering in her, the push and pull of what she wanted versus what she believed was right. "I don't know how to stop feeling this," she admitted, "and I hate myself for it." I shook my head. "Don't. You're human." She looked away, blinking hard. "That's not an excuse." The tension between us felt alive, fragile but electric. It was like standing on the edge of something we both knew we shouldn't touch again, but couldn't resist remembering. Finally, I said, "Maybe we don't have to forget. Maybe we just have to be honest about it." Her lips parted, but no words came. She reached out then, hesitant, trembling, and brushed her fingers against mine. It wasn't a kiss, wasn't a promise. It was a reminder of everything we'd felt, everything we'd risked, and everything we couldn't say. After a moment, she pulled away and stood. "You should go," she whispered. I hesitated, searching her face for a sign that she didn't mean it. But she did. As I reached the door, she said, "You've changed me, you know." I turned back. "You've changed me too." Our eyes met for one last, lingering moment, full of the kind of love that has nowhere to go but still refuses to die. When I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like truth. Some connections aren't meant to be fixed or forgotten. They just live inside you, quietly reshaping everything you thought you knew about wanting, about restraint, about love itself. And as I walked away, her voice echoed faintly in my mind, the sound of someone torn between what they should feel and what they already do. Time didn't erase her. It never could. It only softened the edges of the memories, turned sharp ache into a quiet kind of nostalgia. I moved forward with my life, but she lingered in everything, in the scent of early rain, in the warmth of late afternoon light through a classroom window, in the pauses between laughter. Months had passed when I saw her again. It wasn't planned. I was walking through the small farmer's market on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, when I caught sight of her by the flower stall. She wore a soft cream sweater and jeans, her hair tied back loosely, strands falling over her face as she bent to smell the tulips. For a second, I just watched, the way people do when they're seeing a memory come to life again. She noticed me before I could decide what to do. Our eyes met, and that familiar current passed between us, slower this time, steadier. She smiled. Not the nervous, guilty kind from before, but something real, peaceful. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she replied, her voice gentle, almost teasing. "You still look the same. Still drinking too much coffee," I said, raising my cup. She laughed softly. That sound, it hit somewhere deep, the way music from another lifetime does. We talked for a while about ordinary things, work, the weather, her son, my plans. The conversation flowed easily, like we had already said everything that mattered long ago. There was no need to dig into what we'd been. We both knew. We both carried it quietly. Then, as we stood there by the flowers, she said, "You know, I used to think what we felt was a mistake." I looked at her, waiting. "But now," she continued, "I think it was just something that couldn't last. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't meant to stay forever." Her honesty struck something inside me. It wasn't sadness I felt, it was gratitude for her courage, for what we'd shared, for how deeply it had changed me. "I don't regret it," I said softly. "Neither do I," she replied, her eyes warm, steady. "You reminded me what it felt like to be seen, to be alive again." A breeze drifted through, brushing her hair across her face. Without thinking, I reached out, gently tucking it behind her ear. My fingers lingered for just a second, enough for both of us to feel that silent echo of everything we once were. She smiled, a smile that said thank you, goodbye, and maybe someday, somewhere all at once. Before leaving, she handed me one of the tulips she'd picked. "Keep this," she said, "so you don't forget that some feelings don't need to end. They just change." And as she walked away, sunlight catching the curve of her hair, I realized that love isn't always about staying together. Sometimes, it's about carrying the warmth of someone long after they've gone. That day, I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt full, like she had left a quiet light inside me, one that would never go out, even when everything else did. I watched her fade into the crowd, tulip in hand, knowing that what we had was never meant to be ordinary. It was meant to teach us both how to love deeply and how to let go gracefully. And as I whispered her name under my breath one last time, I realized something simple yet powerful. Some stories don't need an ending because the feeling itself is the forever.